like they'll do impromptu. It's similar like CrossFit, right? Like they'll say, all right, today we're going to do a 60-second impromptu discussion or a little monologue on your favorite restaurant. And then you have like 5 minutes to come up with a 60-second, review of your favorite restaurant. And then they'll critique you on like,
that's Toastmasters, right?
That's Toastmasters. Yeah. So it's just like anything. Like you get immediate feedback. They'll grade your ums and your likes and stuff like that.
So I would basically fail really, really fast.
But it's not about that. It's about just getting better.
Getting comfortable. Yeah.
So I've never done it, but I've always wanted to. When I have more free time later, I'll just.
Because we were looking at trying to like capital raise, and that's one of the main things. It's like, hey, you gotta get better at talking. I've read like flip the script, like pitch anything. Right. I was like, but you're reading, you're like, you know how to do it, but I mean, I still am not good at like, hey, control the frame, can do this. And I was like, it's not necessarily my comfortable. Like, usually I'm good one-on-one, but like large crowds are really bad. Like,
then sometimes it becomes too canned, right? Like if you're like I'm sure you've watched like Shark Tank. Those people come in there at Shark Tank with like a super canned presentation. Yeah. Which, I mean, they're trying to impress these billionaires in the room and they need to be sharp. But it's almost like, I mean, it's TV, right? So it's almost too canned. If someone came in and gave a presentation to me in like my office like that, I'd be like, hey, what are you doing? Like, let's just talk it through. Yeah. Like you need to have your ducks in a row, but not so canned to where it comes off as robotic.
Yeah, I feel like I'm pretty good at just having like a conversation like one-on-one, because it's just like me talking to like a broker or agent or seller. Right. It's like I'm just finding out, hey, what's their needs? How do I fill their needs? How do we create win-win scenarios? Yep. But if I'm like talking, like let's say I was trying to record like a reel or something, and we're live by the way, but and I'm just like talking to a screen and I'm by myself. Yeah. I'm like, this is really strange. Like this is weird. Yeah. And some people can just straight do that. Like that's my whole thing about talking and like presentations in front of people is because I'm literally just talking to myself and no one reacts. So I have no idea if it's good or bad or am I just straight rambling? And I feel like my mind goes like 100 miles per hour and my mouth can't keep up with my mind. So it just gets a little weird.
I've done videos like that where I'm just speaking to the camera and, I have like a rough script in my head of what I want to say. Yeah. And then it's just acting, honestly. You just have to act like there's people watching you and nodding and stuff like that. Yeah. But it's different. A good friend of mine is not great in front of the camera, and it's comical because he's great in front of people. But you put him in front of a camera and he like freezes up. So anyway, it's kind of funny. It's different.
Yeah, it's definitely a talent, and I feel like that's an extremely desirable trait. I feel like because if you can talk in front of people, like communicate, like you can pretty much do anything. Because that's like even like now, I feel like everyone's like in front of a screen. They do everything like virtually. There's like not like very communication, but just to kind of like jump right into it. Welcome to Money Buys Freedom podcast, episode number 45. Today we have our guest, Mark Stevenson, CEO of Hangar Law. And I really want to get into like asset protection, LLCs, trust, estate planning, stuff that we really don't actually hear about. And even myself personally, like I need this episode because I don't know much about even a lot of the podcasts I listen to at bigger pockets. It's not really talked that much, maybe just because it's hard to get lawyers on the camera. Or, I don't know.
They're mostly very awkward people now.
So just a little bit of backstory. How did you or why did you get into becoming a lawyer?
Yeah, great.
Watch like a TV series and like, man, this looks cool. Watch Suits.
Yeah, I think I actually watched Suits after I became an attorney. But I like Suits. They did a good job, and then it kind of got redundant after a while. But my life is not as glamorous as Harvey Spector's for sure, but I don't have the nice suits that he has. Or the office. He always had a great office.
Do you have Michael Jordan as a client?
And don't have Michael Jordan. Don't have any signed basketballs.
That would be cool.
I do have a signed football though from Barry Sanders, but it was kind of an indirect thing. Like, it wasn't like I didn't like meet Barry and he signed my football. But anyway, that's a long story. But yeah, that's my like one little thing to try to be like Harvey Spector, the signed football in my office. So to back up a little bit, so I've been practicing for about 11 years and, The short answer to your question, Tyler, is that I didn't really know I wanted to be an attorney until at the end of undergrad. And I went to Old Dominion undergrad. I was actually a chemistry major in undergrad. So I was, pretty good with math and science. That's always been my specialty. And, did chemistry in undergrad, and you're like, hey, how did you go from chemistry to being an attorney? Honestly, I just knew some attorneys from in that time of my life. I got to know some of them. They were going to Regent University down the street, and I just became fascinated with what they were studying in school and how they could help people with the degree. So that was literally all that I thought about was, hey, how can I make a decent living for myself and my family? I was married at the time, or getting ready to get married at the time. How can I help people, and how can I make an impact, and how can I do something that's interesting?
Yeah.
And at the time, chemistry and science wasn't as interesting to me. It was kind of a dead end field for me to go into as far as career wise. I just didn't have any options. So then I shifted to law, went to Regent, and graduated in 2011.
So you were originally a chemistry major, then you switched to, I guess, the law, and then you went to law school and everything like that.
Yep.
So let's say you did all that stuff. So what was right after that? Did you go right into being?
Yes. So great question. So 2011 graduated. That market was not the greatest for attorneys. If you remember anything about 2008 to 2012, it was just a tough job market for everybody, especially attorneys. And so I had a lot of.
I was in high school, so I had no care.
Okay. So I had a few, so it was tough. So before that time, and I don't want to say it was always easy to get a job as an attorney. I don't think that was the case, but it was easier pre 2008. And so when I was in law school, there was a high law school enrollment, and everyone was like, I want to go to law school. I want to go to law school. I was just happened to be one of those people. And then after like 2010 and 11, law school admissions actually dropped a lot, dramatically, and because the jobs dried up. And so it's kind of funny, like ebbs and flows of education. So anyway, that's the long answer to your question. But I didn't really have too many job opportunities. So and I was uncomfortable at the time being a solo practitioner, going out on my own, just because I had a young family, coming out of law school. There was not an immediate paycheck waiting. Yeah. So I took the Virginia bar. You have to take the summer bar. I took that. I passed that. I worked, had a couple jobs I was working at the time to pay bills, and ended up moving up to Michigan, up to Detroit and this is the end of the story, to work with a colleague of mine up there that had a bankruptcy practice. Oh, wow. And then, so he fed me some work up there. I was kind of a solo practitioner, but I had a little bit of work coming in, and then I kind of just did my own stuff. So I was just out. I was doing court appointed work for Oakland County up there, which is outside Detroit. I was doing contract work for local firms in the area. I mean, I was just grinding, and so I did that for about 2.5 years up there, and just drummed up my own business, got some from my colleague, and started doing short sales up there, real estate work, which is the other part of connecting with Hangar Law and Hunter down here. Was I was doing short sales up there. I mean, people were buying up $5,000 short sales in Flint and Detroit. I mean, it was super hard hit area up there. Yeah. If you remember anything about that time, Detroit and Flint really got hit hard. And so, yeah, people were short selling properties for a couple $1,000s. You could get a 3-bed, 2-bath house up there. Awesome. Yeah. So I negotiated the short sale, and I got a small fee, and then the bank made a couple grand. Yeah. And they were basically just cutting their losses. I mean, these houses once worth, and let's just say, I mean, those houses in Flint, I mean, maybe right now they're worth 120. Yeah. But so it's not like they're $500,000 properties, but at the time, I mean, no one was moving to Flint, so everyone was leaving Flint. Everyone was leaving Detroit. And so the houses were just essentially abandoned. And so the banks were just trying to charge them off and unload them. So that helped pay some of the bills as well up there. And I just learned real estate. I learned what it meant to work with a realtor, what it meant to, work with the listing, do the legal work up there, do the title curative work. I mean, a lot of these had title issues, how do we deal with those in a short sale situation? So yeah, that was a solo practitioner up in, outside Detroit, for a few years, and then moved back down in 2015.
So I know, like, for like real estate CPAs, like everyone's got like a specialty and stuff. Do you, when you were in college, did you have to like have a specialty in law, or is like, hey, I want to go be a crime attorney, I want to go be a business attorney? Do you have like a specialty? Like
so thankfully, a couple different things with that. For the U.S. in this country, you to go to law school, you just have to have a undergrad degree. So any type of undergrad, BS, BA, from an accredited university, and you have to take the law school admissions test, or the LSAT, and obviously have the grades and the credentials to get in. So you don't have to have a pre-law specialty. You don't have to have anything like that. And same with medical school too. A lot of people think medical school, you have to have a biology degree or anything like that. I mean, you can have an English degree and get into medical school. So similar to law. So I know there are pre-law programs and things like that. That's fine, and I think that does help people. But honestly, law schools are kind of looking for diversity. They're kind of looking for people with an engineering degree or science degree or some other degree, because most people that go to law school have an English degree or political science or something like that, which is fine. Yeah, which is fine. There's nothing bad or wrong with that. So no to that question. And in Virginia, we can't technically specialize in a particular practice area. In the technical sense of the term. Yeah. So I cannot say on my website, if you go to hangarlaw.com/firm, I can't say in my bio that I specialize in real estate or whatever. It's just a Virginia thing. Yeah. Because we don't have certifications or special credentials for that. So really, if I wanted to go, represent someone in a traffic matter tomorrow, I can do that. If I want to go, litigate a breach of contract, I can do that tomorrow. If I wanted to, draft a contract for a real estate deal, I can do that. So there are some competencies that we have to have of like, hey, I'm not going to take a felony murder case tomorrow because I've never done that. Yeah. So legally I could. Yeah. my law license gives me the ability to do that, but my knowledge, right, I'm not going to do that. Yeah. And so there's the professional ethics standards that we have as attorneys. We kind of dictate to ourselves whether we have the competencies to do that or not. And so that's really all we have. Now there are special license or special certifications you can get for, obviously tax is one, and then, patent law as well through the, Federal Patent Office, the PTO. Okay.
So you mentioned short sales. What did you exactly do for the short sales? I know like a short sale, like the bank's basically cutting its losses. Can you explain like that process from like a legal aspect and what you dealt with over there?
Yeah, exactly. So the definition of a short sale is when the borrower, the homeowner, is unable to repay the loan in full based on the sale price being low or them not having the assets to cover that difference. Right. And in a situation today, a lot of people have equity. So even if someone's close on selling their home and the true value of the home and what they owe on the home, then a lot of times people can come up with $1,000 or $2,000 to cover that difference in the cash to close. Or people are making money anyway. So it's and they have equity. So, but back in those times, 2008 and after, just pick a random home in Chesapeake that was maybe worth $350 now or $400. Well, maybe back then it was selling for $200 or $225. Yeah. Well, if their mortgage was for $250 and they were listing it and selling it for $200, there's a shortfall delta there of $50 grand plus fees, costs, and things like that. So what we would do is we'd petition the lender. Let's say it's Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo had a bunch. We'd petition the lender. We'd fill out their paperwork. We'd work with the seller. So we'd represent the seller in the situation. So typically a realtor would say, hey, Mark, hey, Hangar Law, I have this situation. Can you help out? John Doe, the seller. He's most likely going to be short on his payoff. So we fill out the short sale paperwork, negotiate with them. We get them all the numbers. I mean, we're going back and forth with Wells Fargo, typically a 3 to 4 to 5 month process. So it's not something quick and easy, unfortunately. And Wells Fargo would do their due diligence. They had a checklist they had to follow because they were getting government subsidies and various things. I don't know all the intricacies of all that stuff. That was way above my head and my pay grade, but they had, Wells Fargo and all the banks had their checklists of what they had to do before they signed off on it. And so if someone was coming in and lowballing it and saying, hey, I want to pay $100,000 for this house that's probably worth about, 200, 225, Wells Fargo wasn't going to approve that. So they did an appraisal as well, and or Wells Fargo would do their appraisal, and they'd say, hey, we think the true value is around 210, 215.
Yeah.
And so we negotiate with them and say, well, the comps are showing is really worth like 195, 200, go back and forth. All that to say is, once we could agree on a price, and they would call it basically their net of what they wanted back after everything was basically seller proceeds. Once everything was paid, then they would approve it, and then we could close, and it was just a regular closing after that.
So what happens? Like, I've seen even like a couple of short sales that have been on the market for a long time. Would you like go back to the bank and say, hey, this one's sitting for like forever? We got to do something here. You say like, hey, we need to cut it lower. Like,
yeah. So it drives realtors nuts because sometimes there's no rhyme or reason.
Yeah.
So we'd have situations where exactly what you're talking about. We'd have pretty good offers coming in, and the realtors would tell me left and right, this house is worth no more than 200. And it just sits on the market and sits on the market. And we would go back, and sometimes, we'd go back and petition to the bank. The other problem is, like, if it was a VA borrower, the VA appraisals are, I think they're still good for 6 months. So if Wells Fargo did an appraisal, on January 1st, I mean, that appraisal stuck on that property for 6 months. Dang. And so that was part of the reason. FHA and conventionals are different. I think FHA is 120 days. Conventionals are maybe 90 days. Anyway, someone can maybe correct me if I'm wrong on that, but it was something to that nature. So to that effect. So that was one reason the appraisals just stuck, and we could contest the appraisal and all that. And most of the time we were not successful with that. I'm sure there are instances, I can't remember off the top of my head. So that was one, but other times, the appraisal just came in too high, and they just would not budge from that. And so, the banks they would do their actuarial tables and have their numbers of like, no, we need the net X amount of dollars from this house. And if we don't get it, it's going to foreclosure. And then a lot of times it would go to foreclosure, and then they would get less than what. Yeah. Than the offers.
That makes sense.
So then the foreclosing attorneys are getting paid, which is good for them, I guess. But, the bank
teaches the seller a lesson, I guess.
I guess so. Yeah. So all that to say is it was super frustrating. Many deals were like that, and realtors would come to us, and I'm like, look, we're doing the best we can. Like, yes, it's crazy. It doesn't make sense. A lot of the deals did not make sense, but that was what we had to work with. So,
I wonder if when it goes to foreclosure, I wonder if they're guaranteed by like the U.S. government to get a certain amount of money.
Yeah, it was exactly. So if it foreclosed, they got some percentage of their money back. Exactly. So
that makes sense.
That was the stuff that was above our heads that I didn't see what numbers the banks were looking at. We had a dimly lit like view of what was going on. But there were deals to be had, Tyler, there were deals to be had, and the people that were able to buy short sales at the time got some deals, and, or if they went to foreclosure, they could potentially get deals at that point. Okay. But a lot of those people, the investors, were trying to get in early, right? Not let it go to foreclosure.
So you were in short sales for a while, and then you jumped into what was the next thing you were talking about?
So when I was doing short sales in Michigan, I connected with Hunter, the owner of our firm, Hunter Hangar. Well, he and I went to law school together. So he was actually negotiating short sales down here in Hampton Roads. I was negotiating up in Michigan. So we just kind of kept in touch and shared stories and like, hey, let's talk about this situation, just like anyone does with, if they have someone that's in the same field. And he started growing his full practice and doing more real estate work, because short sales, I mean, we knew they weren't going to go on forever. I mean, we're still negotiating a few right now, but not like we were back in 2015. Between 2015 and 2018, I mean, that was a huge part of our practice, just because they were just just flowing in, especially in this area. So, excuse me. So I connected with him and joined the firm in 2015. And then we grew our short sale practice, but also just the rest of our real estate practice. So obviously residential closings, title work. We do a lot of commercial work now. land development. I mean, anything that touches the land we deal with. We represent a lot of property managers now, do landlord tenant work. And then now we're just full practice. So anything you could think of, family law, litigation, traffic, DUI, things like that. So,
okay.
Yeah. So my focus was real estate coming into the firm, and then also wills and trusts, and probate work.
Since you're, seems like your specialty is more real estate related work. Yeah. So how would you advise like someone to protect their assets? Let's say like they have one investment property. Is it worth getting an LLC for that one? Or is it like, hey, after you get to a certain point, legal wise, what's the best like avenue to go to securing and safeguarding someone's assets? Yeah.
So with one property, 100%, I recommend an LLC. So the reason for that is when you think of LLCs, it is a business, and you can have an LLC that just holds property, just like a holding company, but is liability protection. So, if you do not have an LLC set up and you have one rental property, or say you're flipping a property and you're doing everything through your personal name, through Mark Stevenson, through Tyler Wynn, through whatever, then if there's any type of litigation that surrounds that, so maybe it's a slip and fall instance, maybe it's a contractor that gets hurt on the property, maybe it's a tenant that gets hurt, maybe there's a house fire, whatever, then you should have insurance, right? I mean, insurance would be the first protection, property and casualty. But then after that, after property and casualty, then, they're going to go after you individually. They're going to pursue you individually. So let's say it's a $2 million claim. Your insurance coverage is only $1 million. They're going to pursue you, or their attorney is going to pursue you personally for that difference, right?
What if you don't have it? What if you anything? All you got is dead.
If you don't have insurance, if you don't have anything, I mean, they could pursue the home. They could pursue anything that you have.
Yeah. So I'm saying, let's say, like, for instance, someone has one rental property. Yeah. They have a $1 million policy on it. The person sues for, let's say, $2 million.
Sure.
And they have a $1 million difference, but they don't have, like, you can sell everything you want. You don't got $1 million.
Yeah. So they could get
my debt.
Right. Yeah. They could get a judgment lien.
Yeah.
A judgment lien means it's an actual lien that they'd file with let's say we live in Chesapeake. They'd file it with the clerk's office, circuit court in Chesapeake. And, if you're, they could attach it to your home. So if you own a home in Chesapeake, they could attach it to your home. So when you went to sell the property, you'd have to pay a certain amount of debt, similar to like a credit card judgment or something like that.
So that lien could just stay there.
Just stay there essentially forever. There's some limitations on that. You have to renew it and things like that. But they're 10 to 20 year liens.
Do you have to like pay per month and stuff like that?
So they could potentially garnish wages. Yeah, there could be wage garnishments. Yeah. So Virginia allows wage garnishments. That's not my expertise, but I know they are possible. And it's not like it's easy to get a wage garnishment. You do have to go through certain hoops. You have to jump through certain hoops and get through red tape. But no, it's 100% valid in Virginia to do wage garnishments on a debt. So it could be, and there's ratios there of like, they're not going to take all the money out of your checking account. But if you're making, let's say you make $1,000 a week, there's a percentage there of after your debt to income, based on your debt to income ratio and other things, to where
you're basically paying child support to someone.
They could take, $100 a week or whatever. So that's kind of an extreme situation. So it goes to your point, Tyler, of an LLC can protect you from a lot of that. So, even if you have your one property and an LLC, TW Investments, LLC, whatever, then they could only pursue that LLC, and any assets you have in the LLC. So if you just have that one property and no other, you don't have $1 million sitting in your LLC checking account, then they absolutely cannot come after your personal assets at that point.
So would you tell someone like each house or investment property get an LLC, or say like, hey, let's say one LLC, you can get like 4 in there? And
that's what I'd recommend. Yeah. 3 to 5 properties per LLC, because the likelihood that you're going to have an issue is pretty minimum. I mean, let's be real. Hopefully, if you do things right and you're taking care of your
people
tenants.
Are getting a little weird now, and everyone wants to sue. So I feel like it's going to come way more common.
Yeah. So I would personally say 3 to 5. I've heard Dave Ramsey, I'm sure you've heard of him. I've heard him say around the same thing for a couple different reasons. One, it's extra tax work to have multiple LLCs.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can increase your liability protection to have each house in an LLC. Nothing wrong with that. But It's extra admin. It's extra tax work. If you want to pay your CPA, or if you want to do it yourself, that's fine. Extra fees with the state, registration fees for the LLC, things like that. And then you need to keep your book separate too. So, if you have this house and this LLC, all of your books and everything need to align properly with that LLC. If you have this one, same thing. So you're dealing with different bank accounts, registration fees, tax fees taxes at the end of the year, filing fees, things like that. Whereas if you have 3 to 5 houses in one LLC, just a little cleaner and easier with the books, but nothing wrong with either way.
Interesting. Yeah. So how would someone, let's say they're listening to this, like, oh crap, I gotta set up an LLC. How would someone go about setting up an LLC if they have no idea what they're doing?
Sure. Yeah. So the super basic way, is LLCs are simple to set up with the state of Virginia, which is great. So you pay, I think it's $100 registration fee, and you basically answer a couple questions and you're done. The problem is you do need some documents. You do need operating agreement. You do need a few other things that I would recommend, especially if you're doing business on a day-to-day basis with it. So our firm's happy to help set that up, pitch for us, pretty modest cost to get that set up based on your situation. But the general fee just to go and pay for an LLC today is, I think, around $100 with the city or with the state.
Because I've set a couple of LLCs through Hangar Law, and it was like, okay, they have all the documents and everything like that. They have like a registered agent, and then you have to have a place of business.
That's right. Yep.
So my one question to that is, let's say you have to pay a certain amount a month. Who do you pay every year and stuff like that? Like,
yeah, great.
Someone has no idea what that is.
Absolutely, yeah. So our firm has a few different tiers. I'll call it of what level of representation you would want. So the super basic level, you're basically just paying us to be a registered agent. And that means a registered agent is someone that receives any legal notices. So if someone is like a mechanics lien or someone's trying to sue you, then they have to send notice to the registered agent. So we have offices in Newport News and Virginia Beach. So they would send a notice to us. We'd be responsible as your registered agent to let you know of the lawsuit and kind of let you know next steps. We wouldn't necessarily advise you on what to do. That'd be a separate discussion. But we would basically say, hey, Tyler, I just got this notice in for X LLC. It's a pending lawsuit or whatever. So that's kind of the main goal of a registered agent. And then you'd have our fee, several $100, and then the re-registration fee with the SEC, Virginia SEC, which is around $50, I think. So it's pretty minimum cost here for an LLC in Virginia.
So let's say they got all their paperwork and everything like that. How do they even file? Is there like a certain website they go?
All electronic.
Electronic. You just go through a website. Hey, do this. Here's your EIN number.
Yep. So EIN is a little separate, but yeah, just with the state, it's all electronic on the SEC website, State Corporation Commission, and it's pretty user friendly now. Thankfully, they do have some hiccups every so often, and then the EIN would be separate through the IRS website. If you have a single member LLC, that would just be you owning an LLC by yourself. You can use your social security number, but you can also file for EIN with the IRS website, and they ask you questions. I think that's all online as well, which is pretty straightforward.
So let's say you don't have an LLC. Let's say there's 2 people on that property, and let's say one person gets personally sued. Could they go after that property if there's 2 individuals on that house? Because I always heard that can kind of like protect you because it's 2 technically people.
Yeah. How would they? So that's like a title question. How would they be owning title together?
So let's say like I got in the car. Let's say I hit someone with a car and they're trying to sue me. They're trying to sue, garnish wages, go after all your assets, and you don't have an LLC, but you bought property with like your wife or your brother-in-law or something like that. And how would is your brother-in-law gonna get screwed too? Or?
So good question. So in Virginia so if it's a joint property, as a married couple, there are debt protections with that. There are liability protections with that. With if it was your brother-in-law, that's actually a great question. It would be a joint tenancy at that point.
Yeah.
I don't think you're putting me on the spot. I'm not a litigation expert. I don't think they could go over, they could try to attack any jointly held properties. It would only be if you held it as a tenant in common or a TIC. There's definitely a special protection with the spousal unity in Virginia. So yeah, joint tenancy should be free from that. And that's where the LLC comes in too. You know, if you're, I'll kind of push it back to that. If you're owning a home with your brother-in-law or some other friend, just put it under an LLC umbrella, and that kind of solves that problem.
So, but as like a husband and wife, you're still be liable because y'all are married, or like?
No, there's a protection there. There's a protection with like I said, as long as it's held in joint tenancy, with the spouse.
Oh, okay. So you're actually, it's more beneficial to put your husband and wife on there. I did know that part because I was like, regardless if like I bought the house or my wife bought the house, we're going to go there together because I knew there was more protection if you didn't have an LLC.
Yeah, joint tenancy there. So that's the key term. And if any attorney that drafts deeds in the area is going to hopefully make sure that's correct, because that's super important. You can also, I've heard other people with high net worth or with, maybe they're in the construction business or whatever, they'll put everything in their wife's name or their spouse's name. I'm assuming it's a male, right? But they put everything titled in their spouse's name, which is kind of funny, for the same reason. Just so they don't have any ownership in the property. Let's say they have $1 million personal residence or whatever. They would just put everything in their wife's name. Again, I'm making assumptions here, but then this also extra protection. Do I think that's necessary? Probably not. Honestly, I would go the insurance route of getting and I'm not an insurance expert, but getting an umbrella policy. Yeah. And, get that through your PNC rep. And to me, that's a lot cheaper. I mean, I pay whatever, let's say $50 a month for an extra couple million.
Yeah, because we have an umbrella policy, and it's definitely worth it. I think it was like you're right. It was like $50 a month or something.
Yeah, 100% worth it. So that combined with the LLC protection is generally all people need.
So you mentioned a couple minutes ago, and I really want to touch that. You're talking about like keeping everything separate in your LLC. Isn't it, if you happen to commingle even a couple of times, that it like voids the LLC and your personal assets? They're like, oh, you actually commingled, so now they can tack you from your personal to your LLC. Yeah.
So great question. That's the technical term, and it's a fun law school term, piercing the corporate veil. Yeah. So generally it's reserved for executives and large corporations because that's where the money is. In an LLC, it is possible though, and my firm's actually pursued folks on that cause of action is what we call it. So yes, if there's a scenario where you're commingling funds, again, you're not keeping your accounting straight, you're using funds from your personal checking to pay for this, and it's just not clean, then a judge, and it kind of makes sense, right? A judge would say, well, you're not really operating this business as a separate entity. You're kind of everything's just going through your personal checking account. Yeah. So there could be scenarios to where, a judge would say, yeah, we're going to pierce the corporate veil. That's the term. And essentially hold the individual liable for the debts or for the actions of the company.
So what happens like for real estate aspect? Okay, let's say all your personal is in this bank, and I want to go set up my LLC in this specific bank, keep everything separate. What if you want to invest your personal money into an investment property? How would that work? Because technically you're taking personal money, investing in the LLC. How does that part work without actually commingling?
Yeah, that's fine. That would be, I mean, and that happens all the time, right? So someone has, let's say someone has a day job and they're trying to put some of their money in from their earnings or savings into their company. That's totally fine. The problem, as long as you keep your books accurate and say, hey, this is a personal investment. The problem is when you just kind of disregard the LLC bank account and you're just not keeping books.
You're just like moving them back.
Yeah, you're just moving funds around and being sloppy with things. And there's other formalities that you would need to follow. Let's say we were kind of talking about this, I think earlier before you started recording, but let's say you don't renew your LLC. So then you did have your LLC, but then for 6 to 12 months, you're operating without a LLC, even though it's pretty easy to renew. So there are other factors like that. It's not just being sloppy with your money, although that's part of it. It's following the other formalities or let's say, you bought this one property through your LLC, but your other two properties with your individual name. And then again, then you have 3 properties, and then this house needs repairs. I'm going to take money from my LLC to pay for the other repairs, but the house is not in the LLC. You can see how quickly it become just like, why even have an LLC if you're just going to be using all of your money? So, but to your initial question, that's 100% okay to invest money into your LLC. Again, you just want to keep accurate records there.
Because the LLC is basically like a pass-through entity.
That's right.
Couldn't you still just take your earnings from your LLC and bring it right straight to your personal, because it's just a pass-through tax-wise?
That's right. Tax-wise. Yeah, tax-wise, exactly. So, but there's still, even if you're taking and claiming that income as individual income, 100% fine tax-wise. The problem is, again, with the other formalities of just keeping your books accurate. When you have a repair on the home, do you pay for it out of your LLC? Do you have all the insurances in your LLC? Do you have a business insurance policy, or is a homeowner's insurance in your individual name or not? So there's a lot of super, super basic things you can do to protect yourself. Are you doing an annual meeting under the operating agreement, just saying, hey, everything's kosher in the LLC, for lack of a better term. I'm following the formalities. I have a registered agent. I'm paying the dues I'm supposed to pay. My insurances are straight. The title's proper in the deed. Just, again, little basic things like that will go a long way.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I've heard of people actually buying LLCs that have been inactive a certain amount of times and stuff like that. So I know my always fear is worst case scenario with everything. So my worst case scenario is my wife forgets to pay the LLC fee or something like that, and we you lose and someone buys it from under. That's my deep fear, because
blaming it on your wife. Huh?
Yeah. So what can that actually happen, and what's the time period on if something like that?
Yeah, that's a kind of a loaded question. So I guess technically yes, you wouldn't necessarily buy the LLC, but you can. And I don't know the SEC rules with this. Tyler, you're throwing me off guard for a second, but throw me a curveball. But there is a scenario where someone can go inactive for a certain amount of time, and then you can kind of just take the name or a similar name perhaps. But there are, if you go to the SEC right now and you can search inactive names. There's also state trademarking and stuff too. There's federal trademarks and there's state trademarks. So perhaps you could maybe take over a name after a certain amount of time. Again, I don't know the rules on that. Or you could create a very, very similar name and register that name and not interfere with the trademarks because they're no longer doing business. So as far as scooping up or kind of using your language, buying a name, I'm not aware of the intricacies of that, but I do believe after a certain amount of time you can use that name that's inactive.
Okay. Yeah. One thing you also mentioned, trademarking. So is that basically someone, you getting your LLC in a certain name and someone using that name? For people who have no idea what that stuff is, what is trademarking in general?
So trademarking in general is claiming ownership rights of that brand, what's called a brand. There's various trademarks you can have, and I'm going to speak mostly with federal trademark wise, because that's more of my experience, but you can also get state trademarks, and I think they work very similarly. But in a federal trademark, you can trademark just the name. So let's just say I want to trademark a phrase or a name, the name of your LLC, whatever. Or you can trademark a logo or something like that. Say your logo is something unique, like a Nike swoosh or something like that. Obviously that's trademarked. The Apple logo, any logo you pretty much see out and about in the world today is trademarked, but you can also trademark the name of something just by itself in plain text. And so that'd be what we call plain, what do they call it? Plain word mark logo or something like that. So I definitely think that's valuable, especially if you're doing business more in a public sphere. If you're kind of like a holding company, just holding a few properties, probably not as valuable or necessary. But if you're doing something to where, like a brand, like a realtor brand or a brokerage or something to where you're out there in the public view more and people are seeing your name and seeing your brand, it's probably worth getting a trademark, at least a plain text trademark, if not a logo.
So for me, for instance, I'm known online for the winning team with a Y, or like this podcast, Money Buys Freedom. So let's say that like I have that, I've been doing it for years, and someone decides they want to like trademark those names and everything like that. How does that work? Like even if you started years ago, and that's the person just say, "Oh, we just trademarked that name," and like, how does that process work?
Yeah, you're getting into the weeds of trademark law, but they're anything with the law, there are certain factors, right? So there's gray areas, but they would look to if you filed a trademark, they would look to the file date. They would look to what they call a first in use time. So nowadays with the internet, I mean, it's pretty easy to see when you started your podcast and when, you know, your first show or whatever. So that could be a way to disprove and show that, hey, I was using Winning Team Network before this other person. So first in use and first to file, those are two factors that they use. And then also they look at geographic location. So if you're doing, you know, in Money Buys Freedom, I mean, the thing with the internet now is complicated, right? Because you can be doing business anywhere. But if you're a local Chesapeake or Virginia Beach company and you're just doing business in Virginia Beach or Chesapeake, and there's a business in California that has a very, very similar name, but they're only doing business in California or Los Angeles specific, then there won't be conflicts there, generally speaking. Yeah. There are mostly conflicts with more of the nationwide companies or some of the online type things where there's bleed over, or if it's a different 100% different type of business. Mm-hmm. So let's say you're doing real estate. Let's say this other person is a baker. You know, they're selling like baked goods or something. There could be agreement there to where there's not a conflict of, hey, yeah, I'm talking about financial stuff over here. You're doing a bakery over here in California. So, you know, there could be ways to where there's no conflict there, no trademark infringement.
Okay. Well, let's say, for instance, someone like, because you can find little designs on the internet, they want to create their logo.
That's right.
They create their logo, put it on their stuff, and they have no idea that someone trademarked. What's the process? That person is like, oh, got you, I'm going to sue you, or like, how does that all process work?
Yeah. So typically it's what we call a demand letter in the legal world. It's kind of a notice like, hey, we've noticed you using a similar mark or similar name to us. You know, we want to ask you to stop first and foremost. And it's a very legal, kind of a demanding way sometimes, or a threatening way almost. And then after that, yeah, it'd be a trademark infringement lawsuit at that point.
But even if let's say that person used that brand and sold a bunch of like apparel or something and made tons of money, is that person like, like, hey, you need all that money you owe that's actually owed to me? Like, yeah,
there could be damages there. Okay. So with any lawsuit in any sphere, any realm, you have to show or prove up damages. So damages could be, hey, my leg is broken from the car accident and I have repairs to my leg, I have surgeries and all these things. Or it can be monetary, of just purely monetary, like, hey, you took my trademark, you used my name to sell all these items or do this podcast and make all these ad dollars. And, you know, I'm going to figure out how much you made off that and I'm going to sue you and try to get my share. So, you have to prove up some type of damages to get it to court, basically. Yeah.
Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah. And then a lot of times, I mean, they settle and various things like that. But if you don't have any damages, you're just like, no, I know you're stealing my name. I don't really know how much money you're making off of it. I mean, you have to figure out some type of number.
Or if you're losing money every week, I was like, hey, you're welcome to it.
That's right.
You want my debts? I got you. But kind of hit into a more popular subject. Everyone wants to like know, hey, how do I plan? Like, let's say you have, a couple of years from now, or you're like the people that are about to retire, they have tons of money and assets. What's the best way to like estate plan? Is like a trust, or like, because I'm like a worst case scenario type of person, and even for our situation, it's like, okay, if something happened to us, like for our daughter, like how do you plan where obviously she's 2, she's not gonna be able to take care of any of this stuff. Right. So how do you really like plan your assets around that? It's like a will is best in this scenario, trust is best in this scenario, your trust and your LLC. Like there's probably all kinds of different ways, but I'm curious to like.
Yeah, excuse me. Great question. So, you know, you've asked a lot of good questions. I'll stop saying great question. They're all great questions. So we talked about the LLCs mostly for liability protection. However, LLCs are a way of what we call succession planning too. So you're kind of talking about asset protection and succession planning. And so a lot of people kind of think that LLCs and trusts are similar, and they can operate in a similar way. But I typically view LLCs as like a business and liability protection, and then trust as the succession planning of, hey, what's going to happen? Like you said, if we pass away, we have, all these assets, maybe we have some debt too, but we have these assets, and I have a minor child that can't run my business, can't handle rental properties. I don't want her to walk into, $3 million of assets or whatever. So, first goal, definitely get a life insurance policy in place. I recommend everybody doing that. Cause that's the first, even if you have debts, and you have some other assets, maybe rental properties, maybe liquid assets, that life insurance policy, I mean, it's peanuts. I should sell life insurance because I believe in it, but, get that life insurance policy in place first and foremost, or multiple. And then, I do love trusts, and Sean Riley's a partner at our firm. He does a lot of the high level estate planning. Trusts are very flexible, and for a relatively modest cost to get them set up, they're very flexible. And all a trust is, Tyler, is it's similar to a company or to an LLC, but it specifically tells the trustee, whoever's in charge of the money, what to do with the money upon your passing. So I know it's kind of morbid to talk about this, but it's important because if I have minor children as well, like you do, and so they could walk into quite a large chunk of money if my wife and I were to pass away based on life insurance.
And I've always heard that if you don't if let's say you really don't like your family, don't set up a will, don't set up a trust. It's a disaster.
Yeah, that's a harsh way to put it, but it's true. So the best thing you can do for your family is to leave them, leave a legacy for yourself, but to leave them in a good situation. I've dealt with a loved one passing away. My father passed away about 10 years ago. Thankfully, he had his ducks in a row, and it made it a lot easier to deal with that side of it. Cause people grieve, and you're dealing with this, and God forbid, someone has their two parents pass away, but I mean, life happens, and, generally, right, one parent will pass away at a time, but it does help to, and Virginia law is very, very favorable to probate situations and to trust and will situations, but it makes it a lot easier when people have their ducks in a row. And again, it's a pretty modest cost up front to do that. And you don't really have to change them and mess with them too much. It's not like an LLC where you kind of need to manage it on a regular basis. Trusts are kind of there. You get it set up, and you don't really have to change it unless some life event happens or what. Maybe you have another kid, or maybe you buy some more properties, or, maybe you start another business and it's making money. Trust is the best way for succession planning. You can also do succession planning in an LLC. So let me just talk about that for a second. So I've had scenarios in my practice where an individual, let's just say he had, 2 or 3 rental properties, and he passed away. Well, in his LLC documents, it doesn't talk about anything regarding who owns those homes after he passed away. So per Virginia law, it actually went to his next of kin, which were his 2 daughters. So his 2 daughters.
It's good that Virginia does it, at least, because I know it could be a little nightmare. It
could have been a lot more messy. We were able to work it all out, but his 2 daughters basically became, through the LLC, became the co-owner or co-managers of the LLC after he passed away. So we had to do all this rigmarole and all this paperwork. Well, meanwhile, it always happens while the deal is trying to close, right? So we have the realtor that didn't know what was going on. We had the buyers that were just waiting, hey, why is this taking so long? And it was because, the seller that owned the LLCs kind of left a mess, and we were there trying to pick it up, and it all worked out eventually, but it took a lot longer than it should have. And we had to track down his daughters and get them to cooperate. And thankfully they were cooperative, because they were coming into, selling some assets, selling some real estate. So there was just extra stuff we had to do. Whereas super simple in an LLC, in the operating agreement, you can list out the successors. You can list out, hey, who's going to be the manager after I pass? It can be anybody. It can be your brother, your sister, whoever. It could be a friend, but then someone that can sign off on all the paperwork to sell the property. Okay. Or maybe it's a rental, and you want to keep the properties in your estate for a long time. Maybe it's a cash cow. Maybe it's a big commercial building, and making a ton of money. And it's no, I want to pass this down to my children. Well, you got to set it up properly in the LLC and or the trust to make sure that money stays in the family and it's, paying out to your children and grandchildren.
Okay. So you can do that for LLCs and everything like that. When does a trust and a will, because I always heard will is like your cars and stuff like that. It's like stuff you just want to sell and this kind of stuff like that. And trust is like for like income producing assets, maybe like stocks and stuff like that. Like that's probably the best avenue for that. When is best for a will? When's best for a trust? You mentioned LLCs.
Yeah.
The trust own the LLCs, and like what's the best way to get that straight?
So my short answer is everyone should have a will at a minimum. The only time I would say even a will might not be necessary is maybe an individual that maybe a college student that just doesn't have anything and they're just a student. Maybe they have a part-time job and God forbid they pass away. They don't have anything. And so a will is not even necessary in those situations. Again, that's a very, very limited circumstance. Any married couple, I would say, should have a will up at the minimum. If they have children, I recommend a trust with children because of again, if any married couple hopefully has some type of life insurance policy, even if it's a few $100,000, what you do is you set everyone's probably heard of, successor beneficiary to a life insurance policy of a primary and a successor. Well, and the life insurance policy, and again, this is kind of getting to the weeds of insurance, but it's super important. You name your spouse if you're married, you name your spouse as a primary beneficiary, and then you name the trust as a successor. So then if I were to pass away, my wife gets my life insurance money. If we both pass away at the same time, roughly at the same time, there are rules for that, right? But they call it a simultaneous death in Virginia. If there's a simultaneous death, then the trust would receive those life insurance monies, which is a large amount, and then the trust can take care of the children at that point. So a will, to answer your question, doesn't have those options. So in a will situation, you may ask, okay, well, if I don't have a trust, my children or my child walks into $1 million in life estate or in life insurance money. It's basically held in it'd be a UTMA account, UTMA account in Virginia, I believe. And it's basically held in an account until the child becomes 18. Once they are 18, they get all that money.
Oh, wow.
So let's say it's a 17-year-old and they're walking in next year into $1 million. I mean, it's theirs.
that's gonna be burned through pretty quick.
Yeah, not the worst thing in the world. I mean, but you as a parent that cares about your children, you may say, no, I want them to earn, the right to have access to this $1 million. So in a trust scenario, you can have different points to where they can access that money. So let's say, all right, let's say they walk into $1 million. Your daughter, you say, hey, she can use up to $100,000 for undergrad. Plus, she can receive $50,000 a year for living, for room and board, things like that. A 19-year-old can live off $50,000 a year plus school being paid for. So then you can say, all right, at 25, if she's completed her degree and is pursuing a master's degree or some type of other, graduate degree, she gets another distribution of $200,000. At age 30, she gets another $250,000. And then at age 35, she would get the balance of the $1 million. Oh my gosh. So something of that.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So let's say that's how the trust is set up. Let's say it's like cash flowing real estate. You just do the same kind of thing. Like, like for instance, my plan would be like, okay, let's say I have a trust and that's pretty much like want it to be like the bank. Like it just keeps rolling in and it rolls in itself and just continues to grow and grow and grow.
Yep.
And I'm under the understanding is like, you see NFL stars, like basketball players, like 70, 80%, or even lottery winners that make that much money. It's like most of them blow it within the first 3 years. It's like even if I'm not around, like to educate my daughter, let's say, because I'm like, I've never used to be afraid of anything, but now I'm like terrified of like passing away.
Are you Enneagram 6? Enneagram 7. Like but Enneagram 6s are worried about everything.
No, I used to be never afraid of anything. But it's like once I had a daughter, now I'm afraid of just that one certain thing.
I got you.
So it's maybe I'm not around to really show her and educate her about money, like what I've learned so far.
Mm-hmm.
And don't want to like give her all this really quick and her not really know how to even handle it.
Yep.
So would you just make it like even your trust or your LLC, it's just like, hey, certain cash flow she gets every month,
Mm-hmm.
and this gets reinvested in there. And I have another question. So let's say, for instance, both you and your husband you and your wife pass away, that you make someone like in charge of that trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What could you like limit to that, what that person can do for the trust, and how does that work?
Yeah, that's great. Great question too. So the trustee would be the individual appointed to manage the trust.
Because there's a trustee and a beneficiary.
That's right. So the beneficiaries are typically the children.
Mm-hmm.
They're, you could have like a nonprofit be a beneficiary too. There's scenarios like that. I had a scenario where the individual only wanted to give their child, let's say 50% of their assets, and they wanted to give the other 50% to whatever nonprofit. That's fine.
That they own.
Yeah, right. So trustee is a fiduciary. So in the financial world and the legal world, we say fiduciary. So their main job is to manage the trust according to the terms of the trust.
Okay.
And so yes, you can limit what you can dictate however you want, generally speaking, of the funds that the beneficiaries would get, when they would get them, if the trustee should invest it, if the trustee should go find more real estate properties. You want to be careful because not all trustees would have the savviness or the knowledge to be able to go do that. But you could say, hey, work with the sound, qualified financial advisor, invest the funds in mutual funds, et cetera, et cetera. So you can be super specific, or you could say, hey, work with this realtor. It's my lifelong realtor I've worked with on all my investments, invest up to $1 million in more rental properties. I don't know. You could do that, so, and again, that would be on the trustee and it'd be on the trustee to manage that money properly. Because it's for the benefit of the beneficiaries. So if they mismanage it, there's a liability there for sure.
So what about like from a legacy standpoint? Let's say like you create your trust and you want this to grow from generations to generations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's say that trustee, let's say 30 years that trust is still going, and that trustee passes away. Do you have like someone for that, or like if you just want to create a lifelong legacy for generations and generations?
Yep.
Like, how would you really structure that? I've seen people that have like family offices and everything. I always was kind of curious, like how, because they run their own family offices, like as a trust. How does that all work? Yeah,
so you'd have successor trustees, and that would be up to the trustee. If they're not named in the trust, that'd be up to the acting trustee. Let's say they're elderly. That'd be up to them to say, yeah, I need to appoint a successor if there's not one listed. So that'd be something they would need to do. Maybe there's another attorney that would generally. Trustees are either attorneys, a family member, or what they call like a corporate trustee, which would be like Town Bank or some other bank like that. They have corporate trustees. And so if you just said, hey, I want Town Bank or I want Hangar Law to be my trustee, then it would be on us to just continue as new attorneys come in or younger attorneys. Gotcha. So something like that. Or we could say, hey, Hangar Law, and we're trustees on some trusts. We would say, if we're unable to do it anymore, we would appoint someone else like Town Bank or something like that. And I only say Town because we bank with Town and I like them, but other banks have trustee departments. What was the second part of your question? Oh, so yeah, there are certain rules, and I'm not going to get into it with trusts and various things going in what we call perpetuity, which just means forever. So there are some laws to prevent that because things can get complicated. But yes, generally speaking, you could set up endowments, you could set up other types of, rental properties and things to where, or investments to where you just have money coming in for a long time. Nonprofits are ways to do that too. So, yeah.
Okay. One question that it's kind of relates to what I'm exactly doing. So are you familiar with like subject to existing mortgages and like how people can buy them with like LLCs? Sometimes people do a land trust. Why would someone use? I always heard like use the LLC on the short term and use a land trust on the long term. What's the legal aspect of that? To like,
I would think, in my view, they're kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
They're very similar. So I don't know the exact reason someone would say that. There may be some other implications I'm not thinking of. But
I think it's more like an asset protection. Like LLCs can technically protect you a lot better than land trust.
Land trusts don't really offer liability protection. That's a great point. LLCs offer more of the liability protection. Land trusts create, in my opinion, they create some anonymity. So if there's a big investor in the area that they don't want their name associated with anything, or their LLC, creating the land trust can create some more anonymity for them to where, people just don't know. So I do know a couple investors that do that. Because the LLC, you can track someone down via the SEC website. So yeah, long-term, short-term, I'm not sure, other than the anonymity aspect. But for liability, I would just say, just do it through the LLC.
So for like a land trust and even a trust in general, if you have your trust owned, because one of my things is like getting in real estate, you can find anyone. Yeah. For anyone's information, know exactly where they live, where they own.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't like that. And including like everyone sends out SMS and stuff like that. It's like, oh, how'd you find my information? I'll say, honestly, it's like out there. Everyone knows, which I mean, I'm from a lot of people they don't like, including myself. But if you have it in a land trust, they don't know.
Yeah.
But if you have it put all your assets in a trust and you don't have Mark Stevenson's trust as the name of the trust, no one would really know who owns that property.
Correct. So yes, so if I purchased my home and in my trust, and people do that, that doesn't offer liability protection because you can kind of pierce through the trust for that, but it does offer some anonymity. I can name it whatever, the MLS, that's my initials, but MLS revocable living trust.
that's good,
and on its face, on a deed, like you would just see MLS revocable living trust. And unless that trust was recorded, which typically they're not, then that creates the anonymity.
Okay. So like, let's say for your personal residence, I go put my the deed in a trust, they won't be able to search Mark Stevenson's.
Well, they can if it's because they can search the previous deed. So you have to do it when you purchase the home.
Gotcha.
Like my house right now is in my name, so you can go find my house if you want to, Tyler. But if I transferred it into my trust, that previous deed doesn't go away. It's still there in public records forever and ever. When you want to purchase, if I purchase an investment property right now, I don't have any. Yeah, I'll probably purchase in an LLC or in a trust for that reason. Because trust isn't really registered with any entity, so it's more private.
So people, they do subject to existing mortgages. They like land trust because they buy the house, or they transfer the deed of ownership in the LLC. They're the extra beneficiary, and they're probably the trustee also.
Right.
So their reasoning is that the bank either doesn't know that it's a transfer of ownership, and I've heard mainly just people online, it's like, oh, that's definitely illegal, or it's like, so what's that aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, basically, if there's a deed transfer, so you're probably referring to the transfer clause or the acceleration, due on sale clause, and acceleration clause in the deed of trust. So I was just talking to someone about this the other day. So generally speaking, banks don't care about that. But anytime there's a deed transfer, so if it's to LLC or to a trust, that violates the transfer on sale clause, unless it's a trust owned by the owners. So if I transfer to my trust, I own over 50% of the trust. And so the banks don't care about that. And same with the LLC, although LLCs can be a little bit trickier with that. But generally, if you transfer to a trust, you're fine. Unless again, it's a land trust owned by somebody else or an LLC owned by somebody else. Technically that violates the due on sale clause. If the individuals continue to pay their mortgage, a lender's not going to call that. Yeah. Now, if it's a commercial scenario, like a commercial building or something of that nature, a commercial note, that's a different beast. I'm talking
because they have terms and they're going to see it.
They're more strict. So, in a general residential situation, yes, the individuals taking over the subject to should be aware of that. And we have forms that we say, hey, you acknowledge this could violate the transfer on sale clause.
Have you ever had anyone get called or? always ask this question.
I think so. There was one scenario where the lender was getting frustrated, or the lender wouldn't accept payments from the third party. So that was kind of problematic. I think it was Wells Fargo, and they were rejecting the mortgage payments because it wasn't coming from the borrower. So something to watch out for. I don't.
So what, they just get the buyers, or I guess the seller's original username and passwords? Yeah. Just go through that?
Potentially, or? Yeah. So I didn't get involved in that because I wasn't really representing both sides. I just did the settlement for that. But yeah, that was a scenario where, paying through the seller's account, if it's Wells Fargo or whatever bank, they all have online accounts now. That could be a solution to that. But again, I wasn't really involved in that, so I don't know how it got resolved. But I have heard of that, banks rejecting payments, and which you would think they would just take the money, but
yeah,
they're
trying to give you money, right?
They have their reasons. What was the other question to that? I think
it was mainly that, because like me and a bunch of other people, obviously, if I can buy a house and take it subject to the 2%. Mm-hmm. Obviously that's a game changer, because that would never happen, never happen again. So I feel like that's free money. Sure. So that's why everyone's trying to learn about that stuff. And there's a lot of risk and a lot of fear associated with that. And that is one of the main fears. Just like, hey, if I buy this, man, I'm getting like 30-40% return. They call that thing, I'm at a negative 40% return.
Yeah.
So
so you want to have an out, you want to have your ducks in a row. Maybe you sell it, maybe turn around and just sell it. Maybe you were going to hold it as a rental. Mm-hmm. But then if they do call the no, you could sell it at that point. That could be an option, which again, I haven't really heard happening. Now there's also assumptions that are starting to be talked about more. That's if you actually assume the person's mortgage and you purchase the property. It's a little bit different from a subject to where you assume their mortgage, the seller's bank essentially approves you to take over and take on that loan. So that's safer, in my opinion, safer than a subject to, because you're taking title and you're taking over the loan. More paperwork involved in that, and they're pretty complicated.
Takes a long time too.
Takes a long time, and my office has worked on a few, and I just want to dispel the myth that they're very complicated and they're not easy. So anyone that thinks like, I'm going to just do this assumption and get it closed in 30 days is probably not going to happen.
And investors typically can't do that, because they have to meet the certain qualification. You have to live in it, which is very, I think, inconvenient.
Yeah. But, generally, exactly. Primary resident. Yeah. Type thing.
So you mentioned, I know I'm taking up a lot of your time, and one thing I really want to talk about is like property management when it comes to stuff.
Okay.
So obviously there's always lawsuits, squatters and stuff like that. So what's the legal aspect, let's say like for an eviction, and y'all have to get involved and go to court? What's that process look like?
So
that's another big fear of every landlord.
Yeah, I don't want to butcher this, but there is so Virginia and most states now are pretty, the laws are kind of there to protect the tenants. Sorry to all of the investors and landlords out there, but and Virginia's pretty fair on both sides. But especially since COVID, there's been a leaning towards protecting tenants a little bit more. So what does that mean? That means that your ducks have to be in a row as a landlord, and you need to have your leases tight. You need to have your paperwork tight. You need to have your notices tight. And what I mean by that is, as soon as you're not receiving rent from a tenant, you need to send notice in a quick, proper time. I'm not going to go through all the days and time frames with that, because it's a little too complicated. But I will put a plug in for our firm, because we handle a lot of that, and we've been very, very successful in properly representing landlords in those situations and making sure, because time is money, right? And so we want to make sure, and we'll work with landlords to make sure your leases are tight, your notices are tight, you're getting notices to the tenant as soon as possible on that first day. Because if you miss that first day or two, things can get delayed a month or maybe even 2 months, and then you're losing rent money. So, so that's super important to have those ducks in a row, to make sure you get that tenant out and a new tenant in there as quickly as possible. Because it doesn't work like TV to where, you just, they don't pay on day 2, you show up in court and then they're out of there day 3. Like, no, it doesn't work like that. There's a process. The courts afford them time to make their payment, to catch up payment. And then even before there's an actual eviction to get them out of there, there's a time period. So you're already kind of losing money just by a tenant not paying.
Yeah.
We want to help you get it done as quickly as possible.
I got you. So I always try to help my friends out with like some of their scenarios. And I know this guy, he's the older guy, but so he was dating this girl for, this is the craziest scenario I've heard. So he's lived with this girl for 2 years, or maybe like a year and a half, but he's tried to, like, they broke up. He's been trying to get her out of his house for like a year or so.
Okay. All right.
And she still gets paperwork sent there. Like, she doesn't have a job or anything. She doesn't do anything. And he can't get her out. She's like refuses to leave, but, they're waiting because she still receives mail there. She doesn't, pay any rent, but you can't get her to leave. And also she is waiting for like a new placement for like, a section 8 place. Okay. So what would what he should do to like help get his house out? Cause he basically just destroys his house. He can't do
that. That'd be what we call it in Virginia is called an unlawful detainer. And so it's an eviction action. Yeah. He needs to file most likely an unlawful detainer against her, even though he's living there, right? Like she's living with him. So he's basically trying to evict someone out of his house legally. And, I mean, that would be the action.
Cause he's called like the sheriffs and they try to get there, but because of COVID or something, he can't get her out because she's got nowhere to go, and they're waiting for like this certain list.
That's a complicated scenario, but so I mean, the sheriffs can't. I mean, I guess a trespassing scenario, but it's like she's lived there for so long. She's not really trespassing because she was allowed to be there at first. So it's kind of a trespassing, but even with trespass, I mean, there's certain procedures you have to go through. So it would be an unlawful detainer situation. Yeah.
He told me that scenario. I was like,
I've heard of that scenario many, many times.
Yeah. Cause that's one of my like kind of fears for like, as let's say you have an Airbnb and a squatter refuses to leave. Well, then you have the eviction process. That's even worse. Yeah. So what's the worst scenario? I know you probably a client,
privilege,
client privilege. You can't say anything, but you can use fake names or anything like that. What's a certain scenario that you thought was extreme, and how did y'all like kind of overcome that?
Oh gosh, like from a landlord-tenant perspective, or
it could
short
be
sale perspective.
It can be a landlord-tenant or a short sale, just anything that comes to the top of your head.
I have a bunch of short sale stories. I just don't know if they're applicable to investing or anything like that. I mean, I think from a general, I'll kind of talk about this and tie it in with money and investment. As a homeowner, and so let me start with this. I had a short sale situation where the individual, and you've probably heard of this, they had they got a new HVAC unit or a new roof or whatever. And nowadays you can finance those. Yeah. So solar panels are a big hot thing right now. So, and I have a story with solar panels too. So anyway, this short sale scenario, this individual, I think they had financed their HVAC. Let's just say it was whatever, 10 grand, doesn't matter. And they forgot about it. They were making payments to it, but they didn't realize there was a lien on the property. So we went to go do the short sale and we don't do title. So full disclosure, we don't do title searches on short sales unless there's some reason we think we should do a title search. One, because they cost money and we don't want to pass that cost on to the seller because a lot of times they were out of jobs.
So they're already going through hardship also.
Yeah. So we're not going to say, hey, we need another $300 to do a title search on the property unless we think there's a reason to do so. And then maybe we split that or the realtor pays it.
The buyer would want to do that.
The buyer would do that. Okay. So that's what happened in this scenario is we were going through the short sale process and the buyer does their title search and, we get it a few weeks before closing, which is standard. And what comes up is this lien for the HVAC, $10,000 or whatever it is. It's probably, let's say it's $8,000 at the time because they had paid it down. So they're obviously distraught because they didn't know there was a lien on the property, even though they probably should have. But I can kind of get it, right? Like you're just making payments.
They probably knew. Oh, well, how did that get here?
So all that to say is, thankfully they knew they were making payments on their HVAC. But it's called a UCC1, and it's a lien for, for roofs or for HVACs or water softeners are a big thing. So it's a special filing called a UCC1 financing statement to where it's a lien on the property, and they have a pretty high priority. So all that to say is they ended up having to borrow money, I think, from a family member to pay the balance of this off, because the lender was like, oh, we're not paying for that. Like that was something y'all did. And so Wells Fargo got their money, or whoever the bank was. But the last week or so before closing, they're scrambling around. They're already in a pretty bad situation. They're moving. They don't have any money, and they're borrowing money from family members to pay off this debt of $8,000 just to get the household. I mean, they were just trying to get rid of this house. So that was one scenario. And then another scenario with the solar panel, same thing. These individuals
solar panels don't transfer. Usually I've always heard that's been a nightmare.
Yeah. So
it's like, oh, you got $20,000. Well, I ain't paying for that.
They're expensive. Yeah. So, I caution to realtors and to owners, negotiate that in a contract. If there's solar panels on there and there's $20,000 left on the payments, I would negotiate that, especially in this market.
Because the mortgage, the loan doesn't transfer.
No, it has to be paid off. Yeah. So, I've seen sellers eat very, very large chunks of money for solar panels because they either didn't negotiate it, or they forgot about it, or they did negotiate it, but improperly, in my opinion. So that's a caution. But all that to say is, I would just caution folks, as homeowners, know what you're signing, know what you're agreeing to. If you're getting solar panels or new HVAC or a new roof, something that's a big ticket item and you're financing it, ask them hey, is this going to be a lien on the property? Read through the paperwork, hire an attorney. You can pay our office, let's say $300 to read the contract for you and tell you
worth it.
Yeah. That you're going to have a $10,000 lien on your property, or hey, these solar panels were 30 grand. It's going to be a lien. And are you planning to sell your house in the next 5 years or 10 years before you pay it off? So those are all questions that, people just don't think about, or maybe they think it's going to be forever home, and they're like, no, we're going to live here for 20 years and pay the solar panels off. But in reality, they're in the military and they're probably
they get orders somewhere else.
So just things to think about as homeowners, protecting your investment, protecting the equity in your home, of being knowledgeable of what you're signing, and, all that.
Okay. So kind of Hangar Law specific, y'all do, it sounds like all things real estate attorney stuff. And then I saw on your page, do y'all do some kind of loans and stuff? Because I thought I saw something. Okay.
No, I mean, not as lenders. That's what you mean. Okay. I mean, we do a lot of loan type paperwork. Work with
that must have been
hard money lenders or commercial lenders. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but we don't, as a firm, we don't loan any money out.
So what, just to kind of wrap this up, what's kind of the common questions you get about, as investors to attorneys that they usually ask you?
Oh gosh.
People just starting out kind of maybe don't know the right questions to ask, or
I mean, the most common question is the LLC, should I create an LLC? And like the one we talked about earlier, so I'm not going to rehash all that
and the answer is yes.
Yeah, exactly. The multiple property thing, the liability thing, the due on sale clause we get asked about all the time, deed transfers.
What about LLCs? Let's say you have them in different states. So are y'all just Virginia, or let's say, for instance, Virginia, they got LLC in Virginia and you got one in North Carolina. Obviously, you probably want to create a new one for the one in North Carolina.
Yep.
How does that work in not commingling? Works the same aspect, or?
Yeah. So I only know a little bit about North Carolina law, but you can, most states you can. So if you have a Virginia LLC, you can file a kind of like a reciprocal LLC in another state. And so you're basically doing business as that same LLC, but you're actually registered in North Carolina. So it just means you're legally doing business there. But yeah, you can have the same name. If the name's taken, you have to use a different name. But I have a client that's out of state, and he registered his what we call foreign LLC in Virginia, his same name, and it's basically saying, hey, it's a Tennessee LLC, but he's doing business in Virginia, and that's the legal way to do it. And then when you sell, so in Virginia, kind of a caveat to that, you can buy property in any name and any entity even if it's not registered. But when you sell it, you need to have that LLC registered So you can buy it with like a Tennessee LLC, but when you sell it, you need to be registered in Virginia, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm trying to get maximize our time. So LLCs can be like a sole proprietor, it could be a S corp, it can be a C corp.
Mm-hmm.
When's the best way to do?
Those are all tax questions. So,
okay. So the LLC kind of technically doesn't change anything.
The LLC doesn't change. Tax liability is more for liability protection for personal liability.
Okay.
So yeah, the S corp scenario, those are all tax questions, which I know a little bit. I know enough to be dangerous, but yeah, prefer not to get into this.
I gotcha. Yeah, I gotcha. So like basically, it's that like, let's say for instance, you have a business LLC, and you can work with your tax professional and whether or not you want to do an S corp, C corp, and all that stuff.
But talk to them, especially if it's solo member, like solo managed. If you start to have multiple partners and members and managers, you definitely want to talk to a CPA or a tax professional about that, because then you have different people getting a cut and various things like that. If it's an individual, your own LLC, my own LLC, it's easy at that point. We talked about that as pass through.
Yeah.
But if it's multiple folks, it becomes more of what I call a taxable moment.
So a lot of people like syndications and funds, but let's say it's something so small and it's just like one or two investors, like they create an LLC, right? Mm-hmm. Can you, in your operating agreement, distribute like, hey, how everyone's going to get paid? Mm-hmm. Let's say like, for instance, like, let's say you as the LLC owner, I want 51%, right? And then the other 49%, one other investor owns, and they're putting the money toward the deal. Can you make it like determine like financing of how things get paid, how this person gets tax benefits, how this person gets everything like that? You just
it's all in
all that stuff.
So LLCs have operating agreements, corporations have bylaws, or corporate docs. So yeah, you want to specify that in the operating agreement. And the 51% holder would be the managing. They don't really have shares, but managing shareholder. But yeah, you could determine who gets paid and percentages, and you could have people that have authority and don't get paid, or people that, don't have authority and do get paid. So yeah, you can separate all that out.
So I know a lot of like syndicators, obviously they don't want to get the big legal paperwork that's like $20,000. Mm-hmm. So they just create like an LLC, and they do like, let's say they do a 20-80% split, and they make it the managing partners, they're the managers, the 20%. And for them to sell or anything, the property, they have like, oh, well, you need 81% majority to sell or do anything like that. So they can still control the asset. Mm-hmm. From a legal aspect, isn't where that those majority holders can still take over ownership legal wise, or anything like that? Or
don't know, honestly, Tyler. Yeah, that's kind of a complex scenario.
I get all these crazy questions. I'm always curious.
I don't know off the top of my head. With LLCs, they're very, very flexible. So that's the only thing I'll say.
Yeah.
So you can essentially kind of come up with any scenario you want, and then you can have different classes of ownership or stock ownership. So yeah, that's something to where you could have a class A, class B, class C, and different levels. So they're very customizable. That's kind of the only answer.
Okay.
I know how to answer that.
So I always heard like even LLC is just like a paperwork game. Let's say you and your friend would go flip a couple houses. You flip a couple houses, and let's say you're done with the LLC. Do you just have to just let it die out and just not pay your fees? Or
you can terminate it. Yeah, you can terminate it.
You have to actually go through termination. Like, hey, we want to terminate this. Or?
That's the cleanest way to do it. You can just not pay your fees, but that kind of looks sloppy. Kind of going back to the piercing the corporate veil thing. Yeah. So I would say, if you're only going to use it for this one flip or this one house, just file the termination paperwork, kind of close it up. Then you won't get billed next year for dues, even though again you can not pay them. But it's just cleaner to.
So I know we answered that at the beginning. Where do you actually go to like put in your registered agent or your location? Where do you exactly go to?
The Virginia SEC website.
Oh, okay, so this is pretty like you have, because when you file, you get your SEC or get your LLC, you put that name in there, and you get an EIN number from that, or
not the EINs to the IRS.
Okay,
but when you file with the SEC, you create your Virginia LLC name, and then you can put the registered agent info in there. You can, and it has your start date. And
is that something y'all do for the individual? Or?
Yeah, we'll handle all that in the formation. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
But where do y'all usually take a step back, or is like, okay, it's just determines on like price on how much we take everything, I guess, right?
So we have like a package for LLC formation. So we'll meet with you or the client and say, hey, we have basic questions we ask. What are you going to use it for? You know, who are going to be the members, the manager, et cetera. And we'll kind of go through our checklist and get the document set up. In a scenario, a basic scenario, right? We have, kind of templated documents for that. But then there are more complicated scenarios like, hey, you want to go in business with your brother-in-law and we're going to do this and that. And he's going to manage the project and he's going to do a lot of the work and put sweat equity in. That happens a lot. You have someone that's like kind of managing the work, and then you have someone that's kind of managing the money. So we can build that into the LLC. So that would be just a situation where we'd work with you on customizing how you want your docs drafted.
So just a final question before we wrap everything up. When you do your LLC, does it matter like what specific names you do? Like I know some people that do, I got to come up with this cool LLC business name, or say like let's say you buy a house on Mills Landing LLC. Does it matter, or just something that helps you identify where those properties are?
Yeah, we have a lot of people we have some clients that do the naming scheme because it helps them keep track. Yeah, because if you're just like,
because you have tons of them and you got all these different names, like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, if you're like Tyler Wynn 1, Tyler Wynn 2, Tyler Wynn, then you just lose track of all.
Yeah, I got you.
So that you can be systematic about it, and it can help you in your CPA.
I got you. Where can people find more about y'all's company and yourself personally?
So hangarlaw.com. You mentioned our website. We try to keep it updated with practice areas and attorneys that are on our list. My email address is super easy, Mark, M-A-R-K, @hangarlaw.com. You can email me. I'll try to respond to you as quickly as possible. And or phone call. I am in and out of the office a lot, so I don't get my phone a lot. But our office number is 757-351-1510. And happy to, like I said, answer any questions or get you to the right attorney. I don't do a lot of practicing myself. I am involved in real estate a little bit in the
because you run the whole business itself.
I run the day-to-day operations, so it's hard to do both. Yeah. And but we have highly competent, great attorneys that do truly care about the people that they work with, the clients, our referral partners. And I would send any of my stuff to any of the attorneys on our list.
Because I have a deal that I have under contract now, and I have someone at Hangar Law taking care of it for me. So it's been nice. Yeah.
So absolutely. So any of our folks, I have personally vetted all of them, and they've gone through an extensive interview process to work at our firm. And we truly, truly care about the people at our firm, not just the attorneys, but all the way down to the staff and to our reception team and to the people that answer the phone. I mean, we can have another podcast about building culture and a high quality team. But so I truly value all of our folks, and the attorneys are, they're not specialists, right? I can't say they're specialists at their craft, but per Virginia law, but they're all, highly competent, highly intelligent, and just good people. So
there you go. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show. And just so everyone knows, we go live every week on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram, and most of the time TikTok, and we're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And next week, we're actually going to dive into more real estate tax stuff. So I appreciate everyone that's coming on. I appreciate Mark for coming on and probably answering, even if y'all don't get value. I got a lot of value because there's definitely a lot of stuff that people don't talk about and probably should be talked about more about, because you always hear online, say, don't get an LLC unless you get a certain amount of this stuff. Well, it definitely opened my eyes on like when you should do that stuff. So it's definitely good. So I appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely.
And sharing your knowledge has been amazing.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom.